Not Groundhog Day, it's Labor Day, September 4th, about 6:30 in the evening. The sun's quite a bit up there still. Thought I'd do the Mr. Rogers version of my entrance out to the observatory. Haven't quite fully set it up yet. I've got one roof try and the door opened up. What I'm going to do is I'm going to point it after I open the roof try here. See? Just like this. I'm going to point it towards NGC 7050, and I suspect it's probably over there. By the time it gets dark, I am hoping, despite the 2 weeks absence from doing astronomy, that it'll be culminating. And I'm crossing my fingers to hope that that will be the case, because I need to resume the NGC series in sequence. So let's move on. I've just entered into the Gemini 2 electronics a request for the scope to spin about. It looks like it's mostly doing it on the declination axis right now to NGC 7050, which is an smallish open cluster in Cygnus. So let's get an idea where it turns up. Wow, this is great. So 7050 is our view tonight. Looking at where the scope is pointing, it should be in a favorable part of the sky for viewing. It's now 8:15, and on the screen you can see before you what might appear to be a loose open, fairly compact open cluster, but it's not. You've seen this baby before. It's culminating to the south. The sky is still bluish. We have not achieved sky dark yet, and we are looking at Messier 22. Globular cluster in Sagittarius, rivaling the Great Hercules cluster in even slightly brighter, but about half the distance nearer to us here on Earth. The thing to note about this is we're culminating at 8:15. Typically, earlier in the year, when I was doing Messier 22, it was culminating more like 9:15 to 9:30. And the sky was about the same brightness, pre-sky dark. So it gives you an idea how, as the sun races south towards the winter solstice, or in this case the equinox first, the sky seems to almost freeze in position, because every night you get out earlier and earlier in order to achieve sky dark. In the very thickest part of the summer, sky dark wasn't really occurring till 10:30, and I expect it to be getting close to it around 8:15, 2 hours and 2 months plus later in the observing season. Of the 30 or so studies we have on our list tonight, from NGC 7050 to 7099, Messier 27, the Dumbbell Nebula, is not one of them. However, what I wanted to do is show you an early view with the sky still clearly blue overhead of the Dumbbell Nebula, because it makes for a nice sense of the seeing in the evening. It's now 8:30. 10 minutes after our last view, I can see the central star. I can also see the oblate football-shaped frontier of Dumbbell Nebula to the directions. The sky still has hints of blue in it. We haven't quite achieved sky dark. We're getting lots of nice color in the nebula. It's planetary itself, and the stars look fairly nice around it, not particularly bloated. I seem to have landed on a set of general parameters that are very useful in imaging deep sky studies. I just wish this monitor screen had a flatter contrast and brightness across its width. So now it's time to go make one more check before we launch into the 7050 series of the NGC catalog. This, of course, is the Crescent Nebula on the vertical axis of the Cygnus cross, NGC 6888. I don't have a very good viewing angle, but I can clearly see nebulosity here in the brighter regions, sweeping around through this brightest star and coming to this point here. I'm seeing color in it. The stars look very nice. I'm very pleased with the image. The crescent is almost culminating, so it's in a very decent part of the sky. And this is our launching point now for the NGC series, whose entries of which I'm going to have to be very economizing in terms of time to keep the length of this video down. So here we are about to launch. Hopefully what we have here is NGC 7050. It's an open cluster in Cygnus on the eastern arm of the cross. It's 5 by 2 arc minutes, some 3,800 light years distant. There's no attribution in terms of its cluster type. I suspect, given its size, it's right pretty much in the center of the screen. I would believe that might be an open cluster. And as previously, open clusters are usually defined by how much distribution of stellar brightness there is, as well as how compact or dispersed they are in that stellar distribution. Anyway, NGC 7050. While NGC 7050 open cluster lies within our own galaxy and was in the sky's middle third, we've had to drop down into Aquarius for NGC 7051. Galaxy in Aquarius, magnitude 14, 1.4 by 1.1 arc minutes, a spiral 111 million light years distant, and almost 9 degrees south of the celestial equator. It's pretty obvious on the screen, the galaxy. It's super oblate, so it distributes its light quite a bit. Its average surface brightness is more along the magnitude 15 range. And the better view for me will be in the manana as I look these babies over. Well north of NGC 7051 is a galaxy in Vulpecula, the Fox, 26.5 degrees north of the celestial equator. It is a magnitude 12.4 elliptical galaxy, 2.5 by 1.5. So it's basically a football-shaped galaxy without any spiral arms. So it's accumulated quite a few minor and dwarf galaxies over its history. 225 million light years distant. This baby is brighter and about the same size than the Great Andromeda Galaxy M31. Okay, NGC 7053 is a galaxy in Pegasus, 23 degrees north of the celestial equator, so quite well placed. It's slightly fainter, magnitude 13, but slightly larger in surface area, 1.4 by 1.3 arc minutes. Well, actually, it's more of a face-on compact galaxy, but about half the size of the previous galaxy in extension, 213 million light years distant. And there is our view. NGC 7056 galaxy is also in Pegasus, magnitude 12.9, so about the same brightness as 7053, I believe it was. I had to skip over a nothing object, and one was too far north. Its magnitude 12.9, 1 by 0.9 arc minutes, so pretty much a face-on spiral with a bar, 242 million light years distant. It's about the size, I would say, maybe a little larger than our own Milky Way galaxy at that distance, 18.5 degrees above the celestial equator. NGC 7058 is an open cluster well north in Cygnus, almost 51 degrees. You probably got partial blockage of the objective lens. The cluster is fairly obvious. It's 10 arc minutes in size, some 1,300 light years distant. There's a number of stars of similar brightness there, but really the cluster should be dispersed pretty much throughout most of the screen, given its size of 10 arc minutes. I'm surprised we picked up any of it at all. There is our view. We're now on to NGC 7062. The Gemini controller skipped over maybe 3 studies that are far too south and below the horizon. It's an open cluster in Cygnus, magnitude 8.3. 7 arc minutes in size with maybe 30 stars, the brightest of which is magnitude 10.1. It is a class 3-1, which means 3 meaning a fairly widely dispersed, but the stars are of a similar magnitudinal brightness. Class 1. 4,800 light years distant and 46 degrees above the celestial equator. I think we're getting the full aperture of the scope on this. Another open cluster in Cygnus, NGC 7063, brightest, magnitude 7, 8 arc minutes in size, so it should take up about half the screen on the vertical display. Some 12 stars, not many, magnitude 8.9. It's a class 3-2, which means the stars are fairly well dispersed for its size, and there's a normal distribution of brightnesses of stars. 2,200 light years distant, 36.5 degrees north declination. We've headed south below the celestial equator again to NGC 7065, a galaxy in Aquarius. Faintish, magnitude 15, 1.1 by 0.9 arc minutes. It's a spiral with a bar, 336 million light years distant, so it's pushing towards Messier 31 in size, minus 7 degrees declination. Obviously fairly face on. I would look for some fuzziness at the frontier in this one. And that frontier, given its size, is somewhere around magnitude 19, so we won't be detecting it. You'll just see it bleeding off into space from the core, which is about magnitude 15.8. What we have here is a peculiarity. There's an NGC 7065A, and usually when you get an alternate like that, it's a fainter galaxy than the original enumerated NGC. This one, however, happened to be magnitude 13.1, 1.5 by 1.4 arc minutes. It's a spiral with a bar, 327 million light years distant, so perhaps even larger than Messier 31. It's a galaxy like the previous one in Aquarius and not too far distant. So picking them out should be fun on the manana. While still in Pegasus, we've swung north again to about 14 degrees above the celestial equator. Our study is NGC 7066, magnitude 13.8, face on, 0.9 by 0.9 arc minutes, a spiral, 233 million light years distant, and this one might have a little trouble picking up on the screen. I'm not really making it out. We're not watching it develop, since I have a limited amount of time for imaging of so many studies this evening. Hopefully we can detect it manana. Here we have another far north open cluster, NGC 7067. We may have some blockage of the objective lens. It's in Cygnus, magnitude 9.7, smallish, 3 arc minutes, 20 stars, the brightest of which is night 11.2. And this is a good study in an open cluster with a class 2-2, which means fairly moderate distribution of stars in space and a fairly moderate disparity in their magnitude. It is, however, 11,700 light years distant. That's a ways out there, 48 degrees above the celestial equator. Okay, we just arrived on site. I am going to go ahead and allow the image to emerge on the screen. It's a small, faint galaxy in Pegasus, NGC 7068. Let me look up the spec on it as you watch how the smallish, faintish galaxy emerges on the screen. NGC 7068. Quickly, NGC 7068 is a galaxy in Pegasus, magnitude 14.8, kind of edgy on, 0.7 by 0.3 arc minutes. It's a spiral with peculiarities, 236 million light years distant, smaller than our own galaxy, some kind of a super dwarfed size galaxy, 12 degrees above the celestial equator. I hope we've been able to pick it out. Here's NGC 7069, a galaxy in Aquarius, magnitude 13.4, so it should make its presence fairly well known. 1.3 by 0.8 arc minutes, rather football shaped. It's a spiral, of the lenticular class O. 414 million light years distant. This one's a ways out there, and it's fairly bright for that distance. And it's about 1.5 degrees below the celestial equator. I would say it's somewhere along 200,000 light years in size in terms of its major diameter. NGC 7071 is an open cluster in Cygnus, once again some 4 arc minutes in size, 5,500 light years distant, almost 48 degrees north. There could be some minor obstruction of the objective lens. There's no other data about it, so it's unclassified open cluster in Cygnus. Well, we just headed for the first time deeper south to Capricornus galaxy, NGC 7073. There may be actually several galaxies on the screen. So the clue to look for, it's about magnitude 14.9 by 0.8 arc minutes, so pretty much face on. It's a spiral with a bar, 247 million light years distant. So it's about the size of our own Milky Way, and it's minus 11.5 degrees. So that's why the field looks pretty good the way it does. We're not getting too much washout from being too far south. All right, this one should be fun to turn up. NGC 7074 is a galaxy in Pegasus. Magnitude 15, but smallish, 0.7 by 0.3 arc minutes. Compact galaxy, 160 million light years distant. So it's kind of a tilted edge on. And it'll be nice to see if we can make out the actual aspect ratio of this galaxy at magnitude 15. Its core obviously should be somewhere around magnitude 15.8. Any extensions, however, will be 3 magnitudes, probably about 16.5. So right on the very edge of detection using the current settings on the Revolution 2 imager. It'll be fun to look for this one tomorrow and note some of those characteristics. We've kind of turned the corner now, but we're beginning the race against the moon. NGC 7077 is a galaxy in Aquarius, magnitude 13.1, an elliptical, almost round, 0.8 by 0.7 arc minutes. 51 million light years distant at that size, boy, that's not much more than 10 or 15. It's a dwarfish galaxy, 1,000 light years in diameter. But given it's an elliptical, boy, it's packed a lot of stars into it. It'd be interesting to run a calculation on this one. So it's about a little more than 2.5, almost 2.5 degrees above the celestial equator. I'm going to let you watch this one develop. And the reason is it was probably going to overpower the screen. This is NGC 7078. It's a globular cluster in Pegasus, otherwise known as Messier 15. I'll give you the spec on it in a second as it develops. One of the more bright and compact globular clusters. Okay. Highly condensed and quite oblate. Look at that core, very football shaped. So NGC 7078, globular cluster Pegasus, is Messier 15, brightest magnitude 6.4, maybe a half a magnitude fainter than Messier 13. 12.3 arc minutes in size, again probably half the size. The brightest stars in it are magnitude 12.6. It's a class IV, which means it's in the upper third of compactness, 33,000 light years distant, so about the same distance as Messier 13, 12 degrees above the celestial equator. There is our look. NGC 7080 will be one of our brighter galaxies this evening in Vulpecula, magnitude 12.3. 1.8 by 1.7 arc minutes, a spiral with a bar, so that's what we're looking for here. 219 million light years distant, almost 27 degrees north declination. So see if you can pick out that bar. And however, the rest of the nebulosity will spread out around it and typically be 4 magnitudes fainter than the galaxy as a whole, which means somewhere around 16.5 magnitudes. So there may be hints of structure in this baby. Here we are, another sub-13th magnitude galaxy, NGC 7081 in Aquarius. Magnitude 12.7, face on 1.3 by 1.3, spiral with a small b, which probably means a not very definitive bar, 147 million light years distant, so kind of a super dwarfish size, maybe 75,000 light years in diameter, 2.5 degrees above the celestial equator. What we have here is another open cluster, NGC 7082 in Cygnus. Magnitude 7.2, very large, 25 arc minutes, so we're not going to get a real sense of its distribution. Brightest stars are magnitude 9.9, it's a class 4 too. Once again, the class IV means basically the stars are really spread out, but the 2, numeric 2, indicates they're of moderate brightness distribution, some 4,700 light years distant, at a little more than 47 degrees north declination. NGC 7084 is an open cluster in Pegasus, magnitude 12, fairly faint, and large, 20 arc minutes, some 2,500 light years distant. So it's about 17.5 degrees northern declination. There's no specification on the distribution or relative brightness of its stars. In fact, I think you'd have a hard time figuring out this is a cluster if you were to look at it in anything other than a very low power scope at the eyepiece with plenty of field of view. NGC 7085, a galaxy in Pegasus, magnitude 15.2, smallish, 1 by 0.4 arc minutes, so slightly tilted edge on, spiral with a small b, I guess it means a small bar, 381 million light years distant, which puts it about the same size as M31, although I believe M31 at that distance would be more like magnitude 14.5. It is 6.5 degrees above the celestial equator. Definitely getting aperture block here. This is NGC 7086, an open cluster in Cygnus. Magnitude 8.4, 9 arc minutes in size, some 50 stars. The brightest is 10.2. It's a middling class Roman numeral 2, 4,200 light years distance, but it's 51.5 degrees north of the celestial equator. We're not going to get much aperture on this sweetie. Okay, here's another one of Fall's globular clusters taking form. NGC 7089, I believe it's Messier 2, but let's take a look at it. Looks as compact, very similar to Messier 15. NGC 7082 is, 7089 is Messier 2. It's about the same brightness, 6.5, the same size, 11.7, and its brightest stars are about the same, magnitude 13.1. However, it is even more compact and slightly more distant. It's a class 2 at 37,000 light years, just slightly below the celestial equator. This is a bit of an experiment. We are way south in Grus, I believe that's the goose. NGC 7091 is a galaxy in Grus, magnitude 12.9, 2.1 by 1.7 arc minutes, spiral with a large bar, 113 million light years distant. The key feature being it is 36 degrees and 39 minutes and 12 seconds south of the celestial equator. Don't expect to see it there. It's probably being blocked to a degree by the apple tree branches. I just wanted to see if anything might turn up. NGC 7092 is an open cluster in Cygnus, 48.5 degrees north of the celestial equator, has another designation, Messier 39. Magnitude 4.6, larger than the moon, 32 arc minutes, some 30 stars, so well spread out. The brightest stars are magnitude 6.8, so if you were in the deserts of Arizona, you might just be able to see one of these stars if you're a sharp-visioned individual. It's a class 3 too, which means the class 3 Roman numeral, they're well distributed, a mere 1,100 light years distant, about twice as far away as M45, the Pleiades. There's our look. NGC 7093 is another open cluster in Cygnus. There's no object information other than it's 1,500 light years distant, so draw your own conclusions. It's some 46 degrees north declination. I think we got the full aperture on it. See if you can tell what class it might be. Well, let's watch this one develop on the screen. See if you can determine what it might be as I look up the data. I'm not really making it out myself. NGC 7094 is a planetary nebula in Pegasus. Magnitude 13.4, 99 by 91 arcseconds in size. The central star is magnitude 13.6. So if they incorporate the brightness of the star into the nebulosity, this baby's really faint. 4,400 light years distant, plus 12, almost 13 degrees in declination. I am going to have to do some research on this, but let's hope that we can make out some faint nebulation around the 13.6 magnitude star to be able to determine that it is actually a planetary nebula. Here we've gone kind of deepish south. NGC 7099 is a globular cluster in Capricornus, minus 23 degrees. It is a class 5, 2,600 light years distant. Quite bright, magnitude 6.9, 8.9 arcseconds in size. The brightest stars are 12.1, and you guessed it, Charles Messier and his associates were able to see it, otherwise known as Messier 30. It is a class 5, so it's slightly more condensed than the average globular cluster. We be skipping ahead. NGC 7102 is a galaxy in Pegasus, magnitude 14.4, kind of an oblate, 1.6 by 0.9 arc minutes, a spiral with a large bar, 218 million light years distant, probably a little larger than our own galaxy, plus 6 degrees declination. Hopefully we can make it out on the screen tomorrow. Let's have that final Carpe Noctem look of, drum roll please, why not the Crescent Nebula, NGC 6888. Okay, we've gone seriously vertical on this one. I don't think the objective lens is being blocked, but it's possible. I can clearly make out the 5 stars I usually look for. Kind of a Hercules-shaped group of stars that are associated with the Crescent Nebula. From my angle though, it takes some extension to be able to see the nebulosity in this region here. Sweeps around like that. I have not seen too much brightening of the eastern sky from the 5th day moon or so after the full moon. So we're still getting a pretty dark sky up there, although I have to take a look at it to determine whether the Milky Way is well defined or not. I'd say we've had a pretty decent night of observations. Carpe Noctem.